We are so pleased to welcome Professor Lee Shulman as our first guest to eRavSoc. Lee is a professor emeritus at Stanford University. He's the president emeritus of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, and he currently chairs the advisory board of the Consortium for Applied Studies in Jewish Education. Lee wrote an article for the Fall Haydion called Counting and Recounting, Assessment and the Quest for Accountability. And we asked him to join us to tell us a little bit more about his thoughts on assessment and on Jewish education. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you, Lee. Thank you for joining us.
Delighted to join you.
Thank you. So your article was originally written with an academic audience in mind. Is there any advice that you would change for an audience of K-12 educators in particular and Jewish day schools in greater particularity?
Well, Elliot, I think we have to make at this point, a fairly sharp distinction between K-12 educators in general and our colleagues in Jewish day school education. Because the K-12 educators in general are currently under enormous pressure for accountability. Accountability at the individual teacher level, accountability at the school building level and at the district level. And in many ways, the policies and the procedures that are associated with that kind of accountability, evaluation, and assessment is over the top. They're using value-added measurements to try to develop profiles of individual teachers, and in some cases even predicate their salaries on changes in standardized achievement among students. But we don't have the time to go into the critique of that. On the other hand, we educators should be accountable. We should have evidence to support the stories, and I mean stories in the most profound sense, that we need to tell about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how well things are going. And in some ways, in my own experience with Jewish day school education, I don't think we take the substantive educational aspect of that narrative seriously enough. We tend to talk about how many students we're recruiting. We tend to talk about where they go after they graduate. Do they go to elite colleges and universities or midrashot in Israel or wherever? And the kind of narrative that I wish we had more of with regard to Jewish day school education has to do with the depth and breadth of Jewish literacy and Jewish civic understanding and participation among our students. How fluent are the kids in Hebrew? How would you distinguish between their fluency in spoken Hebrew and in text Hebrew, and in which aspects of textual Hebrew, biblical, rabbinic, whatever? I don't think we use assessment flexibly enough. And I think we as teachers, as parents, and as community members would love to have those narratives. But I want the educators, not their boards, not the federations. I want the educators, perhaps under RavSoc leadership, to come together and identify the variety of narratives, and then to engage in sfira that supports, accompanies, and inspires the narratives we want to engage in. And I think that's a really important challenge. It's one my colleagues in the Consortium for Applied Studies in Jewish Education hope we can use research to support.
Terrific, thank you. To follow up with what you just said about how schools should think about the narratives they tell through their use of assessment. something in the article you wrote struck me. You quote your teacher, Benjamin Bloom, who wanted to extend, in your words, the narrative about students that schools tell to include the development of emotions, motivations, passions, and identity. And indeed, many of the most important goals of Jewish education lie beyond the traditional purview of assessment. Can schools measure these kind of qualities? And if so, what advice do you have for them as they try to do so?
Well, the answer here is we can't measure them with great precision. But let's face it, Elliot, if we look at some of the more subtle aspects of intellectual work, I've tried to explain often to non-Jewish audiences, what does it mean to think like a Jew? Not something we talk about very often. These are very hard to measure too. So I think we have to be prepared to document qualitatively, quantitatively, through case studies as well as through quantitative assessments as best we can. Some evidence is better than no evidence at all. Can we get at the emotional and the attitudinal and the ethical? Yeah. We can present kids with scenarios. We can ask them to think and reason morally about certain issues and to identify when they see themselves drawing on Jewish sources to support those narratives, those judgments, and when anybody would judge things that way, more broadly in our Western tradition. We can have students meet in small groups. Assessment does not have to be individual. We're often interested in how do our students, when they work collectively, wrap their heads and their hearts around some issues, and with what kind of subtlety, what kind of empathy does this play out? And of course, the other thing is, how many of our schools are committed to trying to do serious follow-up and longitudinal study of their students with them a year later, 2 years later, when they get out of college? Because a lot of these questions, we can get a kind of short-term photograph of it. But the real questions tend out to be, I mean, one of the great tragedies I've always said, it's because I'm a Ramahnik. I spent 3 years as a camper, 3 years as a counselor, and then probably 25 years cumulatively of my 3 kids at Ramah. The amount of research that hasn't been done at Ramah is tragic. We need to know more than merely anecdotally what evidence there is, not only about the kids who flourished at our Jewish camps, what about the kids who didn't? What is there to learn from those cases? So Jewish education is a field where so much more applied research and evaluation could be done, not in the spirit of gotcha, but in the spirit of, like every good dancer, looking in the mirror and learning from what we see when we look there.
Great words of advice. Thank you. As we wrap up, are there any other thoughts or ideas that you want to share with the field of Jewish day school educators?
Well, I think what I'd like to share, since we hope that we're entering an era in which there will be much more serious applied research and evaluation going on in Jewish ed, that the leaders and teachers of our institutions will not only be open to collaborating with working Jewish education scholars who approach them, but will be eager to participate and do work in their own settings as well. We're dealing with a fragile field, Elliot. The finances are fragile, and we need better evidence to present to leaders in the Jewish community that says, this is worth investing in, and we're taking this so seriously that we're doing our own studies to try to make it better. I know we're called faith-based education very often, but that doesn't mean that our stakeholders should accept anything we say we should be doing on faith. They should be asking us for some evidence. And it doesn't have to be test scores all the time. Have kids do writing, have there be focus. I mean, we have many more instruments, methods in our arsenal, in our inventory than we ever use. That would be my...
Thank you. Those are great words, and perhaps you and your colleagues at the consortium will be leading the way to help work with schools and show them some of the methods that you recommend, just like the ones you described today.
Elliot, we have the same supporters. Both the Jim Joseph Foundation and the Avichai Foundation are big supporters of applied research, and as you well know, of course, they are major supporters of ROPSOC and of Jewish day school education. So let's do this together.
Absolutely. Can't end on a better note. Amen. And I wish you and all of our listeners a Shana Tova. Thank you so much.